For GateWorld.net, I'm Chad Colvin, and I have the pleasure today of speaking with Mr. Alexis Cruz. Alexis, thank you for being with us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
We know your work on Stargate, and you were obviously an established actor prior to the movie. Could you tell us about some of the previous work prior to the original film?
Prior to the original film, I was, I started off on The Cosby Show. That was my very first big gig as a guest star on The Cosby Show with Tony Orlando. It was a special episode there. And then I moved on to Sesame Street. And I did that for about 2 years. It was one of the older kids teaching the younger kids.
How old were you?
I was about 15 at the time. I did that for about 2 years. And then I was really, really blessed with having worked with Anthony Quinn in The Old Man and the Sea when I was 15 also. And that was just an amazing experience.
He's a legendary actor.
Absolutely. And to be able to learn so much from him before he passed, it's just a fantastic experience. I was really blessed.
You have the distinction of being one of only two actors, along with Eric Avari, who were featured in both the original film and then also in those same roles on SG-1. How did your casting for the role of Skaara come about?
It was actually pretty funny because at the time I had been accustomed to working fairly regularly as a young actor. And at that time, I hadn't worked in about a year, right, up at that point. And I was getting very desperate. I was just going nuts. I didn't know what to do. Nowadays it's a little different. We're used to the up and downs, but at the time we weren't. And so I was desperate. I was taking anything that I could get. And my agent calls me up and he says, "Well, I've got this one part, this audition for a sci-fi movie. It's a low-budget sci-fi movie, and you would only have 3 lines, and they're not in English. And I really don't think it's worth it." And my agent, who thought very highly of me, and really wanted the best for me, it's really not worth your talent and blah blah blah. I don't think you should do it. But I said, I want to do it. I have to do it. I'm not doing anything else. There are no small actors.
You have to make a living.
Absolutely. So I decided to go in anyway. What the heck? I really had nothing to lose, so I think that always ends up freeing you up a little bit creatively, And the whole scene was really a mime scene. It was a lot of physical work, and so I just decided to take that route rather than concentrate on, it's only 3 lines. Let me say these 3 lines. I tried to work on all of the action, and all of the moment, and all of the life in between those lines. So I did that, and it worked out great. And the director, Roland, and the writer, Dean, loved it. I had no idea who they were at the time.
Right.
This was all like, whatever, independent sci-fi movie, yeah, sure. They fly me out to California for my screen test afterwards, and I'm like, this is kind of odd for a little low-budget picture. And I finally get the part. And they say, well, come down to the studio, and I want to show you around the production office. They show me around the production office, and I start seeing all of I see the art department and all the different designs and the stuff that they're working on. And of course, now having seen the movie, it was a spectacle. So I'm seeing all of this for the first time, and Dean Devlin's going, and we have action figures for you. And I'm going, are you kidding me?
That's a surprise.
Yeah. What? What kind of movie is this? And slowly it just starts unfolding that this is such a huge picture. And as we kind of developed our relationship and as the work progressed, my role just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger, which was their intention to begin with. They just weren't telling anybody, and they just wanted to find the right kid for it.
Right.
And it's taken off from there.
Were there moments during the location shooting where you just looked at the size and the scope of what Dean and Roland were trying to accomplish and just went, wow?
Absolutely, all the time. We shot in Yuma, Arizona, in the desert out there, which was the same dunes where they shot some of the Tatooine scenes in Star Wars. And so that in and of itself was kind of like, you're in the presence of history, right? And but they had built the entire city where we lived to scale. It was this huge, massive complex, and you could walk down its streets, and it was just magnificent. I'd never seen anything like it. I think very few people have. And then we moved to the other location where they had the pyramid, and that was also massive and built to scale, except for the very top. But the rest of it is just huge. So it was boggling, and we just had that every single day, constantly these kind of revelations of how magnificent this film was.
Are there any parts of your own personality that you brought to the character?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I've always enjoyed playing hero roles. I think most actors will always say that the bad guys are more fun. what have you. And I don't dispute that. It is, in terms of letting your hair down. But there's something to be said about playing the hero roles and playing them well, because it's hard to do that without making it seem hokey, or cheesy. You have to do it in such a way that it's going to attract your audience, that they're going to think you're cool. The girls are going to want you, and the guys are, cheering for you at the same time. Right. That's a very hard combination to do. So for me, that's a huge challenge that I enjoy doing, and it does bring out a lot of my own personality in doing it, especially at that time and at that age where I was very naive and impressionable, and I knew that, and I used it.
How did you change your approach to the character once you discovered that the Skaara that would be featured on SG-1 would be, for most of your time on it, a different character almost because of him being a host?
Sure. Well, first, once we moved on to SG-1, it had already been some time since the film. So not only had I grown up
about 3 years,
quite a bit, but I realized that the character would have to as well, and he'd have to mature, and that was I had a lot of questions about that to begin with, in terms of what the direction was for Skaara, and I really had wanted to. I wanted to go in a darker direction. I think heroes are great at the end of the tunnel after they've been challenged. And this was a very different kind of challenge. It's a very internalized one rather than the externalized one of rebellion. And I'd always had in my mind that the journey that Skaara had gone through in terms of coming up from being a little shepherd boy to confronting and ultimately destroying his god. I mean, that is profound in and of itself, right, thematically. So I kind of was pushing with that. And then when they gave me Chlorel, I had no idea what to expect. And usually I would go up there and I'd get the script either the day before I flew up to Vancouver to shoot the series, or as soon as I landed. So I had no idea this was coming. And I opened it up and I look at it, and I was horrified because my character went in such a different direction. This is not where I wanted to go. But of course, that made it more interesting. I hadn't quite realized that at the time, but as you discover it as you work through it, and you go, "Oh, this isn't so bad." Okay, well, so once we got into Chlorel, it became a challenge to also make him as different from Skaara as possible, and still as enjoyable as well, because the tone of the series was very different than the tone of the film.
As someone who spent screen time with both Kurt Russell and Richard Dean Anderson, let's put the question to rest now. Who is the better O'Neill?
Oh, they're different. One was the original O'Neill, and the other one made it. The other one took it, and made it his own. I mean, to say that Kurt was the better O'Neill is, I don't know, because Richard has put his stamp on it. O'Neill now, 11, 12 years later, is Richard is O'Neill. So it's hard to say. And they're both such different kinds of actors. Kurt is so intense, and that's what Kurt does. He is intense in comparison to Richard. He brings so much, sardonic humor to it that it's interesting to watch and it's fun to watch. So it's two completely different styles, and I like having the option.
Fans were saddened earlier this summer to hear about Don Davis's passing. And over the last decade, you got to spend a little bit of time with him, both on screen and off. Do you have a favorite memory of him?
Yeah, Don and I talked a lot about acting in general, because Don was an acting teacher. He taught acting, and I've done my fair share as well of that. Not as much as him, and not to his degree of expertise, which is what was so exciting about talking to him. And mostly him and I, that was our common ground. And we had like really long, not just like a little passing chit chat, but we would sit down at the bar and have intense actor-to-actor conversations about the craft and all of the different techniques and knowledges that go into it, and it was a pretty unique relationship that I had with him in particular on that point, on that ground, and I'm going to miss that.
Yeah. Your final episode of SG-1 was Season 6's Full Circle.
Right.
And that's how Skaara and the remaining Abadonians ascend at the end. Was that title especially relevant for you? I mean, was it a full circle moment for you in your career, knowing that, for the most part, the character had come to a conclusion?
It was. I mean, I think there's... having lived with the character for so long, and then seeing and being a part of the phenomenon of the fandom and how it reaches people, there's always a part of you that wants it to continue. There's always unfinished business with the character when you've lived with it for so long. You know it so well. So there's a little bit of that, but there was the full circle closure in that the fandom and the phenomenon was there, and we can now move on from that, and my career could move on a bit too in other ways as well.
It has been 14 years since the original movie. Stargate is now a hugely successful science fiction franchise. Yes. How does it feel to know that you were there at the beginning and helped lay the foundation?
It is phenomenal to have been a part of this. I think it's every actor's dream to be a part of something this big. And I think like a lot of those dreams, you really never expect it to actually happen. It's just something in the back of your mind. You're like, oh, I want to be an actor, I want to be a star.
It's lightning in a bottle.
It really is lightning in a bottle. That's exactly what it is. How does anybody who had anything to do with Star Wars feel, or Star Trek? I mean, it's a phenomenon, and you often wonder, like, oh my God, why me? How did this happen? But thank God that it did. And it's really seen me through a lot of dark times too, because it's, as most actors in our career, we have ups and we have downs, and especially in the particular low points that I've had, Stargate and everything associated with it has been a good pickup, between how the audience responds and the fact of knowing that you were a part of this phenomenon. So if everything were to end tomorrow, and I couldn't go on with my career, it was a huge milestone that I will always, always be proud of.
At con appearances, you've been performing portions of a one-man play. It's an act that's full of both humor and shock value, but it's also a performance that becomes very poignant for its tribute to the unknown number of foreigners that lost their lives in the World Trade Center tragedy. How did your involvement come about? What got it started?
Well, it was all the pieces were written by Rick Nahara, who's a brilliant comedic writer, friend of mine. And him and another friend of mine, Jacob Vargas, who you might know from tons of movies, Friday and a bunch of other stuff. I mean, I could go on the list. Jacob Vargas is amazing. And they're both really good friends of mine. And they came to me with the show because they had partnered up and were doing Latino logs that Rick had wrote at the Improv in Los Angeles. And they said, Alexis, why don't you come up and do some of these pieces? I don't do comedy. I've never done comedy before, much less at the Improv of all places. You know what I mean? It's like a little back alley theater. There's one thing, I'll give it a shot. But the Improv, it's like serious business. They're like, no, it's all good. We'll show you how. Sure enough, they both took me under their wing and taught me the ins and out of comedy and how to work the comedy in front of people. And I stayed with them. The troupe kind of kept building off of there. And then we started touring the show. Rick had done the show before by himself as a one-man show, but now he was directing and producing it, and he wanted it to be an ensemble where each person plays different roles.
Right.
So we toured it around, and it was a huge success, and that's how I got involved with them. My first comedic debut was at the Improv in Los Angeles, which I'm pretty proud of.
That's an amazing piece to watch in person.
Thank you. Yeah, that was that particular piece about the World Trade Center happened right after. It was the week of, and we had a show that weekend to do coming up. And Rick came to us that Saturday because we performed on Sundays, and he came to us on that Saturday to unveil this piece. And we were all just blown away by it, as everyone else is when they watch it. It's so poignant. It's masterful, and it's genius, and that's the writing that he does.
Now, you're still currently on Shark on CBS?
I'm not on Shark.
You're not anymore. Okay.
Right.
As an actor, though, when you were on there, how different was that working environment from what you experienced with the film and SG-1?
Completely different. It was a different experience because the themes and the tone of Shark were completely different. It was real, contemporary, CBS mainstream rather than sci-fi and Showtime. So there was a lot of that. We're also revolved around James Woods, who was just in and of itself this almost cosmic personality. He's so much bigger than life, and everything that you would expect him to be in every positive sense. He's just an amazing, one of the smartest individuals I've ever met in my life, and very, very generous as an actor. So that was kind of interesting, and again, another lucky break with being on. Boom! I go to another show that is hugely popular, that is mainstream, where I get to take another role and put my stamp on it. And I think that seems to be happening every couple of years. Something, my dream is to become the Harrison Ford of television. How about that?
Any last question for you? Any additional roles on your plate?
I do actually. It looks like I'm going to be doing a part in the new Sam Raimi film called Drag Me to Hell.
Any idea?
I can't tell you anything more about it because there's a whole lot of shh about it. And honestly, I wish I knew more about it because I don't. They're just like, okay, we want you to do this part. Really? What part? Well, you'll see. Just grow out your hair and your beard. This is why I'm all scraggly.
The actors are the last to know.
I'm preparing for that.